So we're going to talk about design thinking. And in particular, we're going to talk a little bit about how design thinking is a good complement to systems thinking and our engagement approach. So first, though, I'm going to start off with a little story. And I guarantee you at the end of the story, you're going to be wondering, how does this relate to design thinking? So this also could just be an example that I have early onset Alzheimer's. We'll find out. But so like most people, I think here today, my circulatory system cycles between two settings, caffeine and alcohol. That transition in the morning of going from alcohol back to caffeine, it's particularly rough at times. Now, I was good. I wasn't that guy last night. But this is challenging, especially on the weekdays when I'm trying to get my daughter to daycare. Because one of the challenges I have is I can never find my wallet. I have no idea where it is. Live in a 3-story townhouse. It could be on the top floor, middle floor, bottom floor. No idea where it is. I put it places, and it disappears. Okay, great. So the challenge on that, though, is that, we'll get back to that one. But the other thing I know is I always know where my phone is. Why? Because my alarm clock and, I'm a technology consultant, so I know where my phone is. So the reason why I like to know where my wallet is in the morning is that I have a 2.5-mile commute to get my daughter to daycare. It's a 4-lane highway, and it's 40 miles an hour. Guess what? The cops know this, the cops love this, the cops make money off of this. So pretty much anybody that lives in the area knows where they hide, but at the same time, I know I'm going to get pulled over at some point. So having my ID just makes it go faster for that. But since I can't find it, it makes the egress in the morning a little bit tougher. The kid's like, I want to get to school, I want to get to school. Dog's like, I want my breakfast, because we feed him right before we leave. And I'm like, I have no idea where my wallet is. So I'll be honest, a few times I have driven without my ID, praying that this is not the day that I get pulled over, because that's always fun. Cops in Maryland have no sense of humor, just so you know. So, all right. You guys are probably all wondering, what does this have to do with design thinking? Well, we're going to start getting into that a little bit here, is that my wife and I started brainstorming on how can we solve the fact that I can never find my wallet. So we came up with a few ideas. She's like, well, why can't you put it in a normal place? In a normal set place. I'm like, well, because sometimes you steal it to use the credit card numbers when you order something online. And also think about it this way, too. How many times have I found your keys still stuck in the door in the morning? Or on the nightstand or on the counter? And she goes, I believe this is the exact quote. Good point, jackass. She tells me it's a term of endearment. I believe her, because she told me to believe it. So we came up with a few more ideas, because I said, that's not going to work. Because at least she agreed with that point, that that's not going to work. But then she had this bright idea. She's like, hey, you always know where your phone is. What if there's a way that we can combine your wallet and your phone? So I said, that's interesting. Since I always know where my phone is, I would then always know where my wallet is. So quick Google search later, Amazon, got a nice little case. So now in the morning when I'm leaving, all I have to do is remember my wallet and my phone, because they're the same thing. Oh yeah, and my car keys. And the kid. But hey, at least I know where the ID is now. So, problem solved. Now, again, this is where we're going to start asking, where it's like, okay, does he actually have Alzheimer's? Because still not sure how this connects to design thinking. How many people know what design thinking is, first of all? Okay, a couple people. And I'm glad a few people raised their hand that are on the Allegiance team. Otherwise, we have a problem. So what is design thinking? Real short, it's a framework for creative problem solving. But the key thing about it is centered around the human. It takes into account the aspects of how we work. And that is the key here. Now, when we start thinking about system thinking, we're engineers by trade. We're naturally wired to think of system thinking. Someone comes to you with a problem. What do you say? For a project, it's like, okay, well, let's see. We're building an e-commerce system. We need to connect it to the ERP. We need to connect it to the CMS. We need to do this, this, and other. We're going to do all of this using a SOA backbone, using microservices architecture. Got it. What about the humans? Oh, don't worry. It's a training issue. They'll adjust. Okay, yeah, so that's a little bit extreme. But the idea here is that through system thinkings, In system thinking, we're thinking about the process. We're thinking about the components in how to solve this. But a lot of times we're not necessarily thinking about the humans. Now, these are not competing approaches. These are actually very complementary, because design thinking at its core is about understanding the why. Why are we doing this? And then it starts to get into the what might be possible. System thinking works really well when we know what the solution should be. So what's really nice is that once we get to a certain point, we can actually make a shift from design thinking over to systems thinking. Because what we want to do is we want to understand the problem. We want to understand it better than anybody else. And then what we can then start figuring out is, okay, how are we going to solve the problem? What's the right solution here? That's what system thinking is about. So the nice thing about this is it's actually a progression. That as we go through this, we can then come up with system thinking and move over. Now, talking a little bit about design thinking a little bit more. Human aspect. Okay, that's great. That's pie in the sky. It's all predicated on the assumption that the future will be better. Tomorrow is better than today. Not saying that today's bad. What we're doing is we're just saying it's better. It's going to get better tomorrow. We're going to make a better world. The other thing we rely upon very much is empathy. So this is where I start tying my story back. Remember how my wife said, why can't you put your wallet in a place where you remember? Okay, that's not very empathetic. That's not understanding the human element of that and all the things. But when she shifted her mind over to have empathy with the problem, and we were able to tie it back to like, she has the same problem with her keys. That's when we start having empathy on this. And we're able to then start working with the human on this as opposed to, it's a training issue. They'll adjust. No, let's work in a way that's natural with them. That's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to have empathy. One of the first things that you learn at Disney in what they call traditions. Your very first day of work. I remember this scares me. This was 19 years ago for me when I went through this. What time is the 3 o'clock parade? Sounds like a dumb question. If this is your first reaction, not very empathetic. People communicate in what they know, what they're familiar with. They're looking at the map saying 3 o'clock parade. Well, it's 15 minutes long. It starts in Adventureland and works its way to Main Street, USA. So there may be a real question there. What is the real question? Well, interesting thing. Could be several things. Is it where I'm standing, what time will it pass in front of me? Or is it, how do I avoid the parade because I want to go do rides? So another aspect of design thinking is curiosity. There's no such thing as a stupid question. And this is the other cool part, is because there's no such thing as a stupid question, there's no such thing as a bad idea. Wacky ideas are cool. We love wacky ideas. So, because what happens is the more ideas that we come up with in design thinking, the more possibilities we create. The more possibilities we create, the more opportunities we have. Opportunities, we either have success or failure with them. It's either a good idea or a bad idea. Well, we just said there's no bad ideas, but some are better than others. So what we end up with is that, hey, this may not have been an idea that worked out, so we learned something from it. So failure equals learning. Learning leads to insights. Insights lead to innovation. Wait a minute, failure is a critical component. So in design thinking, we embrace failure. We think it's cool. Why? Because what we do is we learn more than we did before. We now have more information. We can now create a better solution. And a lot of this is we want to create a lot of possibilities so we can learn, so we can adjust and adapt. And we want to do this very, very quickly. So the idea is that we want to have mechanisms for filtering. Now, this is not a discussion on how to do design thinking. This is just a discussion on what it is. But at some point, what we have to do is we actually have to make decisions. So the idea here is that as we start going through this, we come up with filtering mechanisms to say, this is what we're going to go with. This is what the decisions are. This is what the solution is. And this is, again, where system thinking kicks back in. Our bread and butter today. All right? Another aspect that's hugely important in this, tying it back again to the story about, my wallet, collaboration. It wasn't just me thinking up the solution. It was my wife and I working together. One, she's a lot smarter than me, so I tend to rely on her a lot for things. But the idea is that collaboration is key. More brains are better than one brain. Especially when you have diversity of thought, diversity of opinion, diversity of background. You have great opportunities for learning about different things when you're able to combine people with different backgrounds, different life experiences, different professions, different trades. Why? Because they look at problems differently than you do. We all come to things with our own biases, so let's harness that. That's part of what we want to do in design thinking, is we want to harness those biases to come up with something that's really creative and innovative. So this is actually a picture of the Allegis team. Going from left to right, we have Bob, Eric, me, Katie, Kim. No, just kidding, this isn't the Allegis team. This is actually an example of a semi-mostly functional design thinking team. He's the problem child. Everyone knows the show, right? House, right? One of my heroes. But the idea here is that keeping in mind, better tomorrow. Well, they want to have a patient that survives, right? So the future will be better. That patient will still hopefully be living at the end of the episode. Empathy. Well, we feel for him. We don't want him to die. Collaboration. They're working together to solve the problem. Now, he's just crazy, but that's a different problem. But the other part, too, is that an interesting thing is that if you also then just look at the concept of the show, House, altogether. Anybody ever watch it, right? The first three diagnoses are always wrong. But they have to go through them in order to get to the right solution. Oh, wait, they're creating possibilities. They're learning from their failures. Okay, that's pretty cool. Now, so the other part of this, too, is that, hey, we have 29 minutes left. This obviously isn't the right solution. Okay? There's another interesting part of this. Constraints that liberate. It's not a free-for-all. It's not a whole bunch of hippies in a commune doing this. What this is that there are realities that we have to deal with. If you want to watch the Allegis team twitch a little bit, just yell the word pivot at random points today. Because we started off using Google Material Design when we were designing the new applicant tracking system for them. And then they said, well, you know what, since we just invested a lot of money in Salesforce, we want to use Salesforce Lightning Design System. So we're going to pivot. That's a constraint that liberates. You know what? Because why? Certain decisions have already been made for us. We have to work within the confines of that. So now, guess what? We don't have to think about a whole line of other things. So that's nice. Now, the trick here is not doing it too early, right? Because you do it too early, you cut off possibly important lines of thinking. You may be premature in that, and you may start getting into systems thinking too early. But the whole idea here is constraints that liberate, is that we want to be able to focus in on the things that matter. And so we know from the structure of House, right, that they have 42 minutes to solve the problem. Because there's also commercials. Constraints that liberate. The other part, too, is time boxing. Time boxing is a hugely important tool that we want to be able to, instead of having it be, because if you give designers, right, if you give designers all the time in the world, they're going to take all the time in the world. No offense, but that's how it is. Pretty much any job. Boyle's law is applied to project management. If you give it 3 weeks, it will take 3 weeks. So the idea here is that if we time box it and say, okay, we're going to allow X amount of time for doing some research. We're going to do X amount of time for doing workshops. We're going to do X amount of time for this. What we end up getting into is that actually that time pressure forces decision making. So real quick, just to kind of wrap this all up, and this is actually an example of design thinking in action and systems thinking in action. This is from my past life, a company called Body Media. They make wearable fitness tech. This is back in 2010, 2011. So that's why it's really large and clunky looking. The new ones are a lot smaller. This company was actually acquired by Jawbone about 2 years ago. But I worked with them to create what they call a fit coach. This little device is collecting 5,000 data points a minute. 5,000 data points a minute. It syncs with a web service to their back-end systems. It analyzes the data and presents these really pretty graphs to you. Problem was, the consumer, the armband wearer, was still having trouble figuring out what to do with this information. Oh, yay, I had X number of steps today. What does that mean? Am I on track? Am I doing well? Well, so what we did is we worked with them to kind of understand what's the problem. What are you actually trying to solve? And what they were trying to do is they were trying to create a better tomorrow for their customer. Oh, wait, design thinking. And what they were really wanting to do is they wanted to provide insights and guidance. They also wanted to, what we found through a series of workshops with them too, is that they actually have different partners. Anyone familiar with Jillian Michaels or Jenny Craig? Right? Very different philosophies when it comes to physical fitness. One is high intensity workout. The other is, I want to sell you some product. I want to sell you some food. Well, we had to make the fitness coach be aware of that because they do a lot of white labeling. They also work with managed care organizations and other things like that. But the idea is that this had to be very, very customizable. So part of this was we did a series of workshops with them to understand all of this, create a whole bunch of possibilities with them. And then what we ended up doing is we started filtering into what do they really need out of the gate for this? Minimum viable product for all the Agilists, right? And from that, we then were able to start filtering in on what the solution was. But the great part about this is that because we had them all bought in, we were doing all these workshops where they were helping us understand their business, and we were able to ask intelligent questions. At the end of the day, everyone is in lockstep, and when it came time to begin executing, we just said, okay, well, let's run some quick proof of concepts on the technology, make sure this works, make sure the ideas are good. And what we started off with, it changed a little bit, because originally we were going to have this whole notion of tone of voice, where at the beginning of using it, it would be very re-encouraging and say like, you didn't quite make it today, try again tomorrow. And then as time goes by, it would get a little more stern, to the point that it would go into spouse mode where it would just become passive aggressive. We realized that one probably wouldn't work very well. But what we did say is that, okay, but there is a notion of tone that you can sit there and say like, yeah, you're doing great, you're doing this, that. They also, what we found out is we didn't notice when we started this project, they had tried this 3 times before and failed, because every time they started with a technology solution and not understanding the problem. What we did is we actually were able to filter this down to there's 3 decisions that have to be made. Are you performing better than expected? Are you performing worse than expected? Or are you at expectations? Once we boiled it down to those 3 decision points, the rest of the system got really easy. And that's where the design thinking comes in, is that once we sat there and had the time to analyze the problem, kick around ideas, and then vet out things very, very quickly over the span of a couple of weeks. Because we also only had 5 months to get this thing fielded, because they had to have it in time for the annual fitness craze that starts on Black Friday. Right? So that was hugely, time boxing was good there. But so this is where design thinking and system thinking start blending together. So that is that, and I'm not sure how I am on time. I think I'm over, but really? Wow. All right. So I don't feel necessarily need to take the rest of the time, but what I will say is if you guys are interested in more about this, one thing I will also throw out there is talk to Kevin at some point, or me today, about what we did with Zurich and how this actually got them excited about it. Now, even though they forgot the budget for this project for this year, still a lot of really cool things in there. We'll also be putting up a reading list later. And I'd also invite anybody to also check out the UX channel on Slack as well. So.